Okay, after we cured the base, we are going to pry it off the model very carefully, and hopefully our block out was sufficient so we don't break the model. And this is another reason why I like to do it on the duplicate model, because if you didn't block it out properly, you might have to use excessive force to pry this out, and you might end up breaking your master cast. So try it from different spots, and this should come out rather easily. Okay? So what I'm going to do to this next is I'm going to round off the peripheries a little bit. You can use your lathe, you can use your handpiece with a small tapered burr. Don't want to trim the underside at all, unless I had some undercuts that I didn't block out with the wax. So I'm just going to round off this periphery, because I'm going to have my wax all the way down to the edge. If you felt that you didn't have sufficient block out around the lingual aspects of the teeth, you can certainly go in there with your burr and clean that up a little bit, or relieve it. So over the apron here, I'm just going to clean this up just ever so slightly, because I think I was fairly close to the line. And that looks pretty good. You want to boil off all of this wax here before you can start incorporating your occlusal rim. But I'm going to leave it just for demonstration purposes and bring on my master cast just to prove a point. So this is my master cast that's intact, and this should fit on here passively without any damage to the model, and it does. This is a duplicate of the master cast, so there's no reason why this shouldn't fit on here. You can tentatively hold it up against the opposing. Make sure you don't have any interference, especially on the inside with the apron, on the lingual side of the teeth. That looks pretty good. So this looks okay. So I'm going to continue. I'm not going to continue working on the master cast. I'm still going to continue working on the duplicate, but I just wanted to prove a point that this should fit on there nice and passively. I'm going to taper this apron just a little bit better. This is all going to get covered with wax, or at least a fine film of wax. So I'm not too worried about being uneven color or a little bit rough. So we're going to place this back on here. And now we're going to incorporate the two occlusal rims on either side. And basically you want to use the remaining dentition as your guide, about that height. And same thing on the other side, about that height. So what I typically do for this, I'll take a piece of base plate wax and I'll hold it right up against the abutment tooth here to where I want it to extend, and I'll make a little score line and I'll cut that off. And just like with our complete bite blocks, I'm going to heat up the one edge and roll it. Until I get a sufficient thickness so I can place it on the base plate. So that's good. You can certainly roll the whole thing, but I think I have enough. I tend to put that little ledge on the inside, on the lingual side. And remember, this is going to get a little wider towards the retromolar pad, so I tend to pinch it at the front. I'm going to use my scalpel just to cut this edge here, give it a nice sharp finish. I'm looking at the contour of the base plate and it looks like it's a bit of an incline here and back here like that. So it kind of fits a little bit better. Obviously this is really high now, but I'm not worried about that at this point. All I want is to have the width that accommodates the rest of the dentition and being over the crest of the ridge. Okay, I'm going to seal this down with some wax. Make sure I'm centered. So nice hot wax. And I'll move on to the other side. And once again, I'm just going to cut off enough wax here, about that much, so the length of the dentula space. And then roll my occlusal rim. That's good. Cut off this little excess. And then once again, I'll place that little ledge on the lingual side. It's just a little bit easier to work with. Have the interior portion of the occlusal rim a little more narrow. And once again, I'm just going to shape the underside so it's a little bit easier to adapt and have it centered over the ridge. So I'm pinching it down a little bit while it's still soft. That looks good. Obviously it's way too high, but I can cut that back after. Seal everything down. And now I can start thinking about incorporating some more wax to blend everything in. So I'll go back to the first side that I worked on. And I'm going to flow the wax all the way to the edge. There's still separator on this model, so I'm not worrying about the wax getting stuck to the model. You can certainly soak your models as well. Ideally, what you should be doing after you block out your model and fabricated your LiteCure base plate, you should be boiling off the block out portion and soaking your model and then incorporating your occlusal rim. But for demonstration purposes, just to move things along, I left it. Move a little bit on this side now. And just like we did before with our complete bite blocks, we're going to flow a little bit of wax on top of the base plate so the patient doesn't feel any roughness. Everything feels nice and smooth. And finish off the other side. You can certainly use your fawn stock as well. I like using the number 7, just working with smaller increments of wax, perhaps having a little more control of the wax. You don't have to go all the way to the edge right now, because once you flame this over with your alcohol torch, the wax will flow to the edge of the LiteCure anyhow. So fill it in completely so we have a nice transition between the top of the occlusal rim all the way down to the periphery. All right, we're fairly close now. Just gonna round that off at the back. Now, before I start thinking about cutting these down to the height of the plane of occlusion, I'm going to take the alcohol torch and just flame things over a little bit before I cut it to the right height. Same thing all around. And you can see the wax now finding its way all the way to the edge of the LiteCure. Gives the patient the sensation that this is the actual product, but really it isn't. But at least it's nice and smooth and comfortable. Let that cool off a little bit before moving to the next little section. Get a bit of a bubble here. That looks pretty good. And a little bit over here. Okay, now I can use maybe my font stock just to get an idea in terms of the height. And I can make a little score line here. And if you've trimmed your base parallel to the plane of occlusion, all you got to do is follow your base. Usually this back portion of the occlusal rim ends up being halfway up the retromolar pad, but not for this particular case. If anything, if you're not sure, leave it a little bit higher. So I'm going to start here and then straight back. And I can take my blade while the wax is relatively soft, not too soft because you can end up displacing it, and do that. You can certainly take your rim former as well and melt this down. And just give it a once over here. And you can see the occlusal rim is a little bit wider towards the molars than it is as we're approaching towards the premolars. Just a final flame here. Try to leave the edges of the occlusal rim nice and sharp. It's a lot easier to detect where if there's a premature contact while it's in the patient's mouth than having it rounded. It's important to note that the apron must be flush up against the teeth here. This is the only thing you're going to have while it's in the patient's mouth to give you a good sense of stability. The rest of the bite block is resting on soft tissue, which is not ideal. So this part of the bite block, the lingual apron here, must be very accurately adapted to the lingual side in order to have any sense of stability intraorally and improve your chances of acquiring the correct centric. Just gonna pull it down with some air. And now I can remove this bite block. Maybe just carves the sides a little bit. I can maybe incorporate a little bit of more wax on the edge of the periphery here so it doesn't feel as rough. But be careful not to encroach on the tissue bearing side because it won't fit on your cast and it won't fit in the patient's mouth. Some people like to trim the base plate 1 millimeter short of that pencil line and finish it with wax, so it feels nice and soft or smooth. But either way is fine. And a little bit here too. And just one more time with the alcohol torch, just to smooth things out. This doesn't have to be extremely pretty, it just has to be very effective. So everything should fit back as it was before on our duplicate model, and certainly it fits the same on our master cast. If I can find it. No difference there. So it's nice and stable, there's no movement whatsoever. On the next video, I will show you how to acquire the bite from your patient. We're going to simulate it though. We don't have a real patient to work with, but we're going to simulate it on the models mounted on the articulator.